The metallic clank of a gate echoed as Captain Jax Orion stepped into the alien auction house. A worn-out air filled the room, buzzing with curious beings from across the galaxy, each of them eyeing the captured souls on display. Slaves of different species stood on platforms behind transparent cages, their faces hollow and defeated. Jax was a privateer, half mercenary, half adventurer, and he wasn't here to indulge in the cruelty of the trade. His mission was simple: find a translator, someone fluent in an ancient alien tongue, and get out. He had no intention of leaving with more than what he needed. The auctioneer's voice barked out, "Lot number 12, an Arcadian female, rare specimen, quiet, obedient, capable of reading codes and speaking forgotten languages. Starting bid, 50,000 credits." Jax looked up at the alien woman behind the glass. She stood perfectly still, her shimmering silver skin catching the dim light, her slender body draped in simple cloth. What truly captured his attention, though, were her eyes, an unnatural, haunting emerald green that seemed to carry an ancient sadness, and something else: curiosity. For a fleeting second, her gaze met his, and in that brief moment, Jack saw something beneath the calm facade, defiance mixed with desire, as if she harbored a secret that refused to be silenced. He knew he shouldn't interfere, but the auctioneer's hammer loomed above the block, going once, twice. His hand shot up. 70,000 credits. The room went silent. The auctioneer's hammer slammed down. Sold. 70,000 credits to the human privateer. Jax felt the weight of the decision hit him, but he knew there was no turning back now. He approached the podium, sliding his credit chip across the counter. The auction staff activated the release mechanisms, and with a faint hiss, the transparent cage opened. The Arcadian woman stepped out, moving with a graceful stillness that seemed both deliberate and weary. She stood before him, head slightly bowed, awaiting orders, yet her eyes flicked up, watching him, measuring him, silently daring him to speak first. Jax cleared his throat, uncomfortable under the intensity of her gaze. "You have a name." There was a pause before her lips parted. "Celera." Her voice was soft but carried a weight, as though every word held centuries of meaning. "Celera." Jax nodded, committing it to memory. "You can understand Standard." "Yes," she replied simply, her tone even. "I speak many languages." Her calm demeanor only heightened his curiosity. There was no fear in her voice, no pleading for freedom. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance, but beneath that calm exterior, Jax sensed something unspoken, a determination that simmered just below the surface. He had a gut feeling that Celera was far more than she appeared. As they exited the auction house, the noise of the busy alien bazaar engulfed them. Merchants shouted, starship engines hummed, and strange smells filled the air. Celera followed Jax closely but didn't cower or shrink. If anything, she moved like someone accustomed to the weight of captivity, but not defeated by it. Jax glanced back at her. "I'll need you to translate an old archive. That's why I bought you." He expected a response: relief, confusion, maybe even resentment. But Celera's expression remained neutral. "I will do as you require," she said, though her eyes betrayed the faintest glimmer of something more, interest perhaps, or amusement. Jax didn't press further. He led her to his ship, the Starlance, a well-worn but reliable vessel docked at the edge of the spaceport. As the hatch opened with a metallic groan, he motioned for her to enter. "Welcome aboard." Celera stepped into the dimly lit interior, scanning her surroundings with quiet curiosity. The ship's control panels blinked faintly, and a soft hum reverberated through the walls. Jax watched as she ran her hand along the edge of a console, as if taking in the essence of her new environment. "This isn't a luxury cruiser," Jax muttered, feeling oddly compelled to manage her expectations. "But it'll get us where we need to go." Celera turned to him, her eyes glinting under the low light. "I did not expect luxury." There was no sarcasm in her voice, just a quiet truth that made Jax pause. He wasn't sure what he had expected from her, but this composed acceptance caught him off guard. "Let's get you settled," Jax said, gesturing toward the ship's small crew quarters. "It's not much, but it's yours for now." Celara followed him down the narrow corridor. As they reached the cramped room, Jax caught himself glancing at her again, wondering what stories lay hidden behind those unsettlingly calm eyes. Before he could stop himself, he asked, "How did you end up at the auction house?" For the first time, something flickered across her face. A shadow of emotion, quickly buried. "A mistake," she murmured. "One that will not be repeated." The cryptic response left Jax with more questions than answers, but he knew better than to press her. "Fair enough," he said with a shrug. "Get some rest. We leave at first light." Celara gave a small nod, stepping inside the room. Just before the door slid shut, she looked back at him, her emerald eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for choosing me." The door hissed closed, leaving Jax standing alone in the dim corridor. He frowned, unsure whether her gratitude was genuine, or if it was the first move in a game he didn't yet understand. The starlance hummed softly as it cruised through the vast emptiness of space. Jax sat at the control panel, his gaze fixed on the swirling expanse of stars. Celara was seated across from him, studying the ancient archive on the console, a tangled mess of symbols and alien languages. She leaned in close, her silver fingers brushing the screen as if coaxing meaning from the cryptic text. "You recognize any of this?" Jax asked, breaking the silence. Celara tilted her head slightly, her emerald eyes scanning the display. "It is old, very old, but yes, some of it is Arcadian. It speaks of longing." Jax raised a brow. "Longing?" Celara nodded but didn't elaborate. Instead, she tapped on a line of text, and the holographic screen shifted, revealing layers of encrypted code beneath the words. Her expression remained unreadable, though Jax sensed a tension in her, like a string pulled too tight. "I can decipher it," she said quietly, "but there is something hidden here, something beyond the words." Jax watched her, intrigued. He had bought her to translate, but now he found himself wondering what secrets she might reveal. Not just from the archive, but from within herself. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "What do you think this archive was used for?" Celara paused, her gaze never leaving the screen. "It is a guide to desire." The answer caught Jax off guard. He straightened in his seat. "Desire?" "Yes." Celara's voice was soft but certain. "Not just physical desire. The words speak of connection, of yearning, for understanding, for freedom, for things denied." Jax studied her, trying to gauge how much of that answer came from the archive, and how much came from her own experience. "That sounds personal." Celara's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "Perhaps." Before Jax could respond, the ship's proximity alarm buzzed, cutting through the quiet. He swiveled to the console, pulling up the radar. A ship loomed in the distance. Patrol cruiser with the distinct markings of the Dominion, the most powerful faction in this sector of space. Jax cursed under his breath. "They must have tracked us from the auction house." Celara stood, calm but alert. "What do they want?" "Probably you," Jax muttered, adjusting the ship's controls. "The Dominion doesn't like it when privateers meddle in their affairs." The patrol cruiser was gaining fast, its weapon systems lighting up on Jax's display. He slammed a fist on the console. "Strap in. Things are about to get rough." Celara didn't hesitate. She moved to a seat beside him, fastening herself in as Jax diverted all available power to the engines. The starlance groaned under the strain, but it surged forward, racing through the void with the cruiser hot on its tail. "They won't stop until they catch us," Celara said calmly, her voice steady even as the ship jolted under enemy fire. "You know that." Jax grinned, adrenaline surging through him. They'll have to catch me first. The ship veered sharply, ducking through the debris of a long-forgotten battlefield. Jax's fingers flew over the controls, weaving the starlinks through the shattered remains of ancient vessels. Celara sat quietly beside him, her expression serene, though her eyes sparkled with something that looked suspiciously like excitement. "You enjoy this, don't you?" Jax asked as he pushed the ship to its limits. Celara tilted her head, her silver hair falling over one shoulder. "It is liberating." Jax laughed, the sound unexpected even to himself. "You're a strange one, Celara." The Dominion cruiser fired again, narrowly missing the starlinks. Jax banked hard to the left, sending the ship spiraling through the wreckage. The enemy cruiser followed, relentless in its pursuit. "Any bright ideas?" Jax asked, glancing at Celara. She tapped the console, her fingers moving with a dancer's precision. "There is a gravitational anomaly nearby. If we time it correctly, we can use it to slingshot away." Jax arched a brow. "You sure about that?" Celara gave him a small, enigmatic smile. "No." Jax chuckled despite the danger. "You're crazier than I thought." But he didn't argue. He adjusted their course, aiming the ship toward the swirling mass on the radar. The anomaly loomed ahead, a shimmering distortion in space, its edges flickering with energy. Jax gritted his teeth and pushed the engines to their limits. The ship hurtled toward the anomaly, the cruiser right behind them. "Hold on," Jax warned. The starlinks hit the edge of the anomaly, and for a heart-stopping moment, everything went silent. Time seemed to stretch, the stars bending and twisting around them. Then, with a deafening crack, the ship was flung forward, out of the anomaly, and into the clear expanse of space. The Dominion cruiser wasn't so lucky. It veered too late, caught in the anomaly's pull. Jax watched as it was swallowed whole, disappearing into the swirling void. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was close. Celara unfastened her harness, her expression unreadable once more. "You handled it well." Jax glanced at her, noting the faint glimmer of approval in her eyes. For the first time, he wondered if this journey would be more complicated, and far more interesting, than he had anticipated. With the Dominion cruiser behind them, silence fell over the starlinks. The hum of the engines became the only sound as the ship sailed deeper into the unknown expanse of space. Jax leaned back in his seat, stealing a glance at Celara. Despite the chaos they'd escaped, she looked unruffled, calm, collected, and entirely in control. He finally broke the silence. "You've been through worse than that, haven't you?" Celara met his gaze, her expression inscrutable. "Worse is relative." Jax chuckled under his breath. "I should have known you wouldn't make this easy." Celara studied him for a moment, her eyes gleaming with quiet curiosity. "You were not obligated to save me. Why did you?" Jax blinked, caught off guard by the question. He'd acted on instinct at the auction house, an impulse he couldn't quite explain. "I needed a translator," he said, though the answer felt hollow even as he spoke it. "And that is all." Celara's voice was soft, but the challenge in her words was unmistakable. Jax shrugged, unwilling to delve deeper into his own motives. "Let's just say, you seemed like someone worth saving." Celara's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then you saw more than most." The room fell into a comfortable silence as the stars drifted past the windows. But Jax's mind was restless. There was something about Celara that he couldn't shake. An aura of mystery that clung to her like a second skin. And it wasn't just her calm demeanor or her cryptic words. It was the sense that she was holding back, concealing something far more profound than he could imagine. "Why were you really on that auction block?" he asked at last, his voice low. Celara hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "Would you believe me if I told you?" "Try me." She turned her gaze to the stars, her voice a whisper. "Am not a slave by circumstance. I am a slave by choice." Jax frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. Why would anyone choose that? Cellara's emerald eyes locked onto his, their depths swirling with untold secrets. Because some prisons are invisible, Captain Orion, and some desires are only understood in captivity. Jax opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. Her answer was not what he had expected, and it left him with more questions than answers. "Let me get this straight," Jax muttered. "You wanted to be bought?" Cellara gave a slight nod, her expression serene. "I needed to find the right person." Jax rubbed the back of his neck, bewildered. "And you think that's me?" "Perhaps," she said cryptically. "Time will tell." Before Jax could press her further, the console beeped, interrupting the moment. He swiveled back to the controls and pulled up the display. The signal flickered on the radar, something faint, but persistent. "What is it?" Cellara asked, moving to stand beside him. Jax narrowed his eyes at the screen. "Distress beacon. Looks like an old one." Cellara's gaze remained steady. "We should investigate." Jax glanced at her, weighing the risks. Investigating a random beacon could mean anything. A trap, salvage, or something worse. But the look in Cellara's eyes told him she wasn't asking for permission. "All right," Jax said with a sigh, setting a course toward the beacon. "Let's see what kind of trouble we're flying into." As the ship adjusted its trajectory, Jax leaned back in his seat, stealing another glance at Cellara. Her silver skin shimmered under the dim lights of the cockpit, and for the briefest moment, he wondered what kind of game he had unwittingly stepped into. Whatever it was, there was no turning back now. The Starlance drifted silently toward the source of the distress beacon, a faint signal emanating from an old vessel floating aimlessly in the void. As it came into view, Jax could see the ship's hull, scarred and pockmarked from years of neglect. Its design was unfamiliar, the kind of relic lost to time and forgotten by all but scavengers. "That's not Dominion tech," Jax muttered, scanning the vessel. "Looks ancient." Cellara stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the ship. "It is older than it appears. This was not meant to be found." Jax arched a brow. "And yet, here we are." As the Starlance docked with the derelict ship, deep, unsettling silence settled over the airways. No signs of life, no movement, just the cold hum of the void surrounding them. Jax grabbed his blaster from the console and glanced at Cellara. "Stay behind me. We don't know what's waiting in there." Cellara's expression remained calm. "I am not afraid." Jax grinned. "Good. That makes one of us." The airlock hissed as it opened, and the two of them stepped into the abandoned ship. The corridor was dimly lit, the emergency lights flickering intermittently. A strange, musky scent lingered in the air, a smell that spoke of decay and time long past. "Stay close," Jax whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of their boots against the metal floor. Cellara followed in silence, her silver skin seeming to absorb the dim light as they moved deeper into the ship. They passed through empty chambers and narrow passageways, their footsteps echoing eerily in the hollow space. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became, as if the walls themselves whispered forgotten secrets. Jax glanced back at her. "You sure this was a good idea?" Cellara's lips curved slightly. "Curiosity demands exploration." Jax smirked despite himself. "I'll remind you of that if we run into trouble." They entered what appeared to be the ship's command deck. Room filled with ancient, half-functional consoles. Jax tapped one of the screens, and to his surprise, it flickered to life, displaying fragments of garbled data. Cellara leaned in, her fingers brushing against the console. "There is something hidden here," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something alive." Jax stiffened. "Alive." Before Cellara could respond, a low hum vibrated through the ship, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Jax's neck stand on end. The consoles flickered wildly, and strange symbols began to scroll across the screens in rapid succession. Ah, Celara, Jax muttered, taking a step back. Celara remained calm, her gaze locked on the screen. It is not what it seems. This ship, she paused, her eyes narrowing. It was waiting for someone. Jax's heart raced. Waiting for who? Celara turned to him, her emerald eyes gleaming in the dim light. Us. Before Jax could respond, the ship rumbled and the doors behind them slammed shut with a deafening hiss. The air grew thick with tension, and a strange energy seemed to pulse through the walls as if the ship itself was waking from a long slumber. "K," Jax muttered, gripping his blaster tightly. "I'm officially regretting this." Celara stepped toward him, her expression unreadable. "Do not be afraid. This is not an ending, it is a beginning." Jax blinked, trying to process her cryptic words. What the hell does that mean? Celara smiled, a strange, knowing smile that sent a shiver down Jax's spine. "You will see." And before Jax could ask another question, the lights dimmed, and the hum of the ship grew louder, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. The ship vibrated underfoot as if it were alive, pulsing with an eerie rhythm that reverberated through the walls. Jax gripped his blaster tighter, his senses on high alert. "This is bad, Celara. Really bad." Celara stepped closer to the console, her fingers dancing across the ancient symbols. "It is not what you think. This ship, it's an archive, not a trap." Jax shot her a skeptical look. "An archive? That's not the vibe I'm getting right now." She glanced at him, a faint smile curling on her lips. "It contains memories, stories, desires. Of those who once lived here." "Desires," Jax muttered, feeling like he was falling deeper into a mystery he didn't understand. Suddenly, the room around them shifted. Lights flickered, and holograms sprang to life, projecting shimmering figures into the air. They were ghostly images of an alien race, tall beings with luminous skin, their faces serene and unreadable. They moved in silence, as if caught in moments of their past. Jax stared in awe. "What the hell is this?" "Their history," Celara whispered, her eyes scanning the ethereal figures. "They were explorers, dreamers, and lovers." As the holograms glided across the room, a soft voice filled the air, an ancient language, haunting and melodic. It was beautiful, but there was a sadness to it, a yearning that made Jax's heart ache without knowing why. Celara turned to him, her emerald eyes glowing in the dim light. "This is what the archive holds. A chronicle of their desires, their longing for connection across the vastness of space." Jax tried to process her words. Why does this matter? Why were they waiting for us? Celara stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "Because the same longing that drove them lives in all of us, even you." Jax tensed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Celara smiled softly, a knowing glint in her eyes. "You do. You've carried it with you your whole life. The search for something beyond yourself. A purpose, a connection." Jax opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. She was right, and he hated how easily she saw through him. Before he could respond, the ship's hum deepened, and the holograms shifted. One figure stepped forward, more defined than the others. A woman with silver skin and emerald eyes, identical to Celara. She looked directly at Jax, her gaze filled with longing and regret. Jax's breath caught in his throat. "What the?" "She is me," Celara whispered. "Or rather, she is what I was, before." Jax turned to her, stunned. "What are you saying?" "I am part of this archive," Celara said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Fragment of their legacy, preserved across centuries. I was created to find someone worthy to carry their story forward." Jax's mind reeled. "You were waiting for me." Celara gave a small nod. "You are more than you know, Captain Orion. And together, we can continue what they started." The weight of her words settled over Jax like a shroud. He had spent his life drifting from place to place, chasing adventure without knowing what he was truly searching for. Now, standing in this ancient ship with Celara by his side, he felt for the first time that he had found something worth fighting for. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Celara's expression softened. "Not much, just chance. To explore, to connect, to be free." Jax exhaled slowly, a strange sense of peace washing over him. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see where this takes us." The holograms flickered one last time before fading into the darkness. The ship's hum grew softer, as if satisfied, and the oppressive weight that had filled the air lifted. Jax looked at Celara, feeling a bond between them that hadn't existed before. It was subtle, but undeniable. A connection forged not by force, but by choice. "Come on," he said with a grin. "We've got stories to chase." Celara smiled, and for the first time since they met, it reached her eyes. "Yes, Captain Orion. Let's begin." The starlets drifted quietly in the cold expanse of space, the ancient ship now nothing more than a faint blip behind them. But everything between Jax and Celara had changed. No longer strangers bound by circumstance. They were partners now, two souls tethered by fate, with the promise of infinite possibilities ahead. Jax sat at the control panel, the hum of the engines filling the silence. Celara stood beside him, her presence both comforting and enigmatic. He stole a glance at her, the way her silver skin shimmered in the low light, the way her emerald eyes reflected the stars. There was a softness to her now, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. "You sure you're ready for this?" Jax asked with a grin, his hands hovering over the ship's controls. Celara tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Are you?" Jax chuckled. "Fair point." The quiet hum of the ship seemed to mirror the calm between them, a shared moment of understanding that words couldn't capture. For the first time in his life, Jax didn't feel like he was running from anything. Instead, he felt as though he was running toward something worth chasing. "So, where to?" he asked, leaning back in his seat. Celara smiled, a small, genuine smile that sent a strange warmth through him. "Anywhere. Everywhere. As long as we go together." Jax nodded, setting the course for uncharted space. The ship's thrusters roared to life, propelling them toward the endless stars. It felt right, like they were meant to carve their own path through the galaxy, writing their story one adventure at a time. As the stars streaked by, Jax leaned closer to Celara, his voice low. "You ever think about what's out there? All the things we haven't seen yet?" "All the time," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse beyond the cockpit window. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared experiences settling between them like an unspoken promise. Whatever lay ahead, danger, wonder, or the unknown, they would face it together. Celara shifted, breaking the silence. "You were right, you know." Jax arched a brow. "About what?" "About me," she said softly, her emerald eyes gleaming. "I did have desires I never thought I'd admit. And one of them," she hesitated, her voice almost a whisper, "was finding someone like you." Jax's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't a man used to emotional confessions, but there was something raw and real about her words that cut through him like a knife. He opened his mouth to respond, but Celara placed a hand on his arm. A touch so light, yet it held the weight of galaxies. "No need to say anything," she murmured. "Just, don't let this end." Jax gave a crooked smile, his hand covering hers. "Not a chance." The ship's engines roared as they plunged deeper into the unknown, the stars spreading before them like a vast canvas waiting to be filled. And with each passing moment, Jax felt the bond between them grow stronger, not just as allies, but as something more. Partners, explorers, dreamers. The story of Captain Jax Orion and Celara was just beginning. A tale of adventure, longing, and connection that would span the galaxy. For them, The journey would never end, because their story wasn't one of endings. It was a story of endless beginnings.